Life threw some plot twists my way in February. First of all, at work, they announced that they were laying off 10% of the workforce. Along with my colleagues, I had to wait for days to see if my life would be upheaved. Waiting and watching as people I have worked with for over a decade were erased. If you have ever been in a similar situation, then you know that just because the people disappear doesn't mean the work does. So even though I ended up safe and keeping my job, picking up the pieces continues to be a struggle every day as I try to track down where certain projects are, who is the next point of contact, and taking on a lot of work myself. At the same time, there was a very tragic and unexpected death in my extended family. I still found escape in reading this month, but I wasn't feeling very bubbly or upbeat, enough to be social or film BookTube videos. My mood also impacted my reading choices this month. I deviated from my TBR, and it impacted my ratings and overall enjoyment of some books as well.
Hello and welcome to the BookTube channel, Jack and the Book Stack, where I talk about a wide variety of book genres and the bookish lifestyle. Today I want to wrap up all the books that I read in the month of February. As I mentioned, February took a little bit of a detour when it came to my BookTube plans, but that's okay. I still read some great books. I read across many different genres as usual, but I was definitely feeling more like literary fiction or general fiction books. So that really took up a huge chunk of the reading, along with some romance books, but again, not as much as I was planning on for the month of February. I am going to rank the books that I spent some time with this month in order from my least favorite to my most favorite. I break these down into categories of disliked, liked, and loved, and I have chapters down below if you want to kind of skip around a little bit. I do have one book for the Unranked category this month, and that book is David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. I chose to DNF this book on page 274, which is, I don't know, maybe about a third of the way through it, and I was just kind of bored. I was really engaged with the beginning part of the story. I thought it was really interesting. I liked our main character, David Copperfield, as he became an orphan and kind of got into the system and was really a victim of poverty. I liked that exploration for a little while, but then I kind of got over it. I wanted to read this because I also was planning on reading a retelling of this story in February, and I thought it would be great to pick up the source material. But after reading the retelling, I think I've got my fill. I kind of get the idea of where this will go, so I'm not sure if I will ever pick this one up again. On to the disliked category. The book that I liked the least in the month of February was Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. Hamnet is set in the year 1580, and the title character is the one that inspired Hamlet by Shakespeare, so that's kind of the story of this. But we're following a Latin tutor falling in love with this eccentric young woman who has certain abilities, so we follow their love story as they meet each other, but then we also jump ahead to when they have kids and there's a plague going on and the kids are getting sick. Hamnet is one of the kids. So there was one scene that I liked where it talked about how the plague originated, which was through fleas. And I thought that was a really, really cool description. I thought that was super, I don't know if it was unique, but it was very fascinating. I liked that. But besides that, I disliked everything about the story. And I didn't care too much about Hamnet or his sister. I didn't care about this couple falling in love. I actually hated them. I felt like they read very much like teenagers who think they know everything, and I was kind of like rooting for their downfall, which is horrible. Bad karma on that one for sure. But I just was annoyed reading this book, so that's why I say this is my least favorite of the month. Still in the disliked category, but a book that I enjoyed slightly more than Hamnet was Severance, a literary fiction by Ling Ma. Severance was marketed as a satire about the millennial condition, and it was about how to be a functional adult in like a global capitalist society. And these are all buzzwords to me. These are things that I have said in previous videos that I want to read more of. So I read a few satires in 2023, so I've been looking for more, so that appealed to me. And then the whole millennial condition and capitalism, that's something I read in the book Ripe in January, which was about kind of working like corporate America and the criticisms on that. And so that's why I wanted to pick this up, and it was mismarketed extremely. So this is actually a apocalyptic book. It's like apocalyptic and post-apocalyptic, because we follow this young woman who is working in New York City and this pandemic breaks out. And it's kind of like, it almost feels like zombie situation, because people don't die, they just get stuck in these routines and they're like kind of like zombies. So we follow one timeline as this impending disease is swiping over the nation, or maybe the world, I don't know. And then we also jump to another post-apocalyptic vibe where she is one of the only remaining people, and she falls in with this band of characters and kind of how they go about surviving in this world. That sounds intriguing in itself, like that plot of this post-apocalyptic world. However, this was not a plot-driven book, so we don't focus on those things. This is more introspective of her journey, and it just fell incredibly flat for me. And I think mostly because how it was marketed to me, those are the things I was expecting, and it didn't deliver on that. So it could be a matter of missed expectations, I suppose. And also there were no quotation marks in this, and that drives me nuts because I can't tell if someone is speaking and if this is dialogue between characters or like an internal monologue. So that confusion might have added to it as well. All I know is I did not necessarily enjoy this, and I don't even know who I could recommend this book to. Now for the liked category. At the bottom of the list, we have Monsters, A Fan's Dilemma, a nonfiction book by Claire Dederer. I read Monsters through Libby, and I heard about this originally from the Best of 2023 video by Alyssa, aka Nerdy Nurse Reads, here on BookTube. But I also saw that it was one of the nominees for the 2023 GoodReads Choice Awards for Best Nonfiction. This is an exploration of a very fascinating topic, and so I was so excited to pick this up because it's so relevant, and it's something that I often think about. So this is how we can appreciate the art of someone who we consider a monster. So if we think about BookTube, for example, one of the common conversations is around problematic authors. So can we still enjoy the work of those authors if they are deemed problematic or if we feel they are problematic? A great example, and one that is actually covered in the book, is J.K. Rowling, the author of Harry Potter, of course, and she is not a friend to the trans community, and that has labeled her as problematic. And so people are often torn if they can still enjoy her work, if they can still talk about it, display it on their shelves and that kind of stuff, because they don't agree with what she puts out into the world. So great topic, and again, one that I have considered often. Something I thought was very interesting in this book is that men being considered monsters was often because of their crimes against women or children, whereas a big section of this book talked about what constitutes a woman being a monster, and it seems to be the abandonment of her children. And I put that in quotes because the abandonment could even be just closing the door to your kids so you can work on your art, your novel, whatever it is. And that is even considered abandonment if you're not taking care of the family. So I thought that was a really interesting distinction. Some of the monsters that they do talk about are like Bill Cosby, Hemingway. They talked about Picasso, which I didn't know. I did not know that Picasso would put out cigarettes on his girlfriend's face. Kind of viewing him in a different light here. So this had a great amount of arguments and perspective. I don't know if it introduced too many new concepts to me. The first half I really enjoyed. The second half seemed to lean incredibly feminist, like a feminist study, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it just kind of went in a different direction than I was looking to explore. And it didn't really give me any answers. it was just something to add to like the different thoughts that I have when I'm looking at this work, because I'm still torn. I'm still really torn if I can enjoy the work of someone knowing that in my moral opinion, they're bad. But then it also goes to like, how do you know? How do you know that they're bad versus like information that could be distorted and given to us? And it kind of goes into cancel culture as well. And, you know, that could be a little dramatic. Oh gosh, I don't know. I don't have any answers, but reading Monsters was still very, very thought-provoking. The next book that I liked in February was We're All Mad Here, a spicy reverse harem written by Leanne Bell. I checked this book out on Kindle Unlimited, and I was intending to do a vlog with Alice in Wonderland retellings, but that's one of them that took the hit this month when I wasn't feeling up to filming, but still had a good time with this book. This was an interesting take. I really enjoyed seeing all the characters, like the Cheshire Cat, the March Hare, the Mad Hatter, the White Rabbit, the twins, Tweedledee and Tweedledum. I will never see them the same way again. So all of those characters take a very, very spicy twist with our new Alice. So Alice finds herself in Wonderland when she's trying to get over her ex-boyfriend Daniel. She's super insecure about this breakup, and that's something that really, really bugged me, is like I could like do with less of her moping about that failed relationship. But she decides to have like a one-night stand with this guy who calls himself the White Rabbit, and then she gets taken to Wonderland, and she has to complete all these very smutty trials in order to get out. And so that's what this is. And it is very smut forward, and therefore pretty ridiculous. Like having to complete these smut trials is like, okay. But I love the creativity, and there was still a lot of plot because of that, because of all these different characters showing up in Wonderland. And ultimately she has to face the Red Queen, or the Queen of Hearts, not the Red Queen, sorry. Queen of Hearts. So I really, really liked the creativity with this. It was on the fence for me with consent. So with my dark romance and my smut, I like enthusiastic consent. And this was really borderline, because she's in a lot of these trials, she's trapped and she has to do these things, and she ends up liking it. But I don't, that's like your lips say no, but your eyes say yes kind of vibe. Like that's why I say it's like borderline. So I rated this 3 stars. I rated it as a like because I liked the creativity and the spice, but the borderline consent and then the super ridiculous smut I couldn't take too seriously, which I mean, you don't always have to. So that is why this lands on the list where it does. The book that I enjoyed more than that one was Demon Copperhead, a literary fiction by Barbara Kingsolver. Technically, I think this actually could be considered a historical fiction. I'm not quite sure. Let's just call it general fiction, right? We're not gonna split hairs on this one. This one I read for my video where I was reading 3 winners of the Women's Prize for Fiction, and I wanted to see if my taste could align with these winners. So more details are in that video. I will link it down below for you. Okay, this is the one that is the retelling of David Copperfield. And I liked this book. It is a great examination of institutional poverty and the effects particularly on children. It also touches on the opioid crisis and how that affects people. I don't know if I was incredibly connected to our title character, Demon Copperhead. This follows him from, I think, like 5 or 6 years old up until early adulthood, and just his journey, and it really follows this poverty cycle and how he cannot seem to get out of it. And when you have like one book, like a massive work like this that centers around the life of one character, I expect to feel connected to them. So that's why this is in the liked category. I don't know if this was a slam dunk for me. I don't know who I would recommend this to. I guess if you like David Copperfield, I would recommend this to you, because at least the beginning part of what I did read of David Copperfield, Copperhead. I'm getting them confused. I don't even know if I'm saying it right in this clip. I guess if you liked this was a pretty good translation into like more modern day. I think it's like 80s or 90s when this starts off. At least the beginning, I really thought it was cool how we modernized it. And I don't know, it's interesting. And then there's an interesting parallel that the issues discussed in this one about institutional poverty and the effects of children still exists today. So that's kind of alarming, and I think that could be kind of good. So I guess I would recommend this if you've read this Dickens work, even though the author says you don't have to read this in order to read it. I think that's who I would recommend it to. The next book that I liked in February was a highly anticipated 2024 release. I'm talking about An Education in Malice, a horror book written by S.T. Gibson. Not unlike many other bookworms out there, I loved S.T. Gibson's other book, A Dowry of Blood. And seeing she was coming out with this one, I knew I was going to pick it up as soon as possible. This one was also about vampires, and it was a spin on Carmilla, which is the vampire book that inspired Dracula. And I have read that. So I was excited about this modern spin on it, and it had like a sapphic romance. And I heard it had like dark academia vibes because it takes place at a college. So I was really excited to pick this one up. However, it was so basic. Nothing about this stands out. It had an interesting plot, interesting characters, interesting dynamics, but it was like every other vampire book out there. There was nothing special about it. And what was so special about A Dowry of Blood is S.T. Gibson's writing. It just was magnificent. It was exquisite. I would highlight that book like crazy because each quote was just so beautiful. You could just like wrap yourself in this prose and just be so cozy and inspired, and it was beautiful. The best written book I've ever read. And Education in Malice was so basic, like a contemporary novel with vampires. It didn't have that magic in the writing that I was really, really hoping for. So I was pretty disappointed in that. The book that I liked the most in February was Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass, a classic fantasy by Lewis Carroll. Now, I have 3 editions of this book, and I read this again because I intended to do an Alice in Wonderland vlog where I read this and then a couple retellings and didn't quite make it. That's why I threw the B-roll of this in the beginning so I could still show you guys. But I have 3 versions of this book. I have this amazing like gothic illustrated copy, but this is only the first story. So I looked at the pictures, but I didn't read this one. I also have this beautiful penguin cloth-bound edition, but it's white, and I didn't want to get it dirty. So I didn't want to use this one, although, gosh, this is really pretty too, and it still has the illustrations in it as well. Not the gothic spin of this one. This one wins for artwork for sure. So I ended up using this one to read it because it has both the stories, and I love the similarities to like the cartoon that I'm thinking of. And then there's also some like live action remakes, like I'm thinking of like older ones that were like truly terrifying to me as a kid. This whole story to me as a kid was horrific because like the idea of being trapped somewhere really strange and not being able to get home is terrifying when you're a kid. Really enjoyed this. It was just as whimsical as the movies, but being in Alice's head, she is unhinged. Like her inner monologues are just wild. Just like, what are you talking about? So that was really funny. There were things that aren't in the cartoon but might be in some different versions of the movies, or there's you know, I think it was Tweedledee and Tweedledum don't show up in the first book, but they show up in Through the Looking Glass. I think that was it. But so the cartoon is kind of like bringing both of these stories together because there's characters that show up in one. So that was, it was interesting to compare it that way. And I really had a good time with this. It was much more to the point than I thought it would be. We didn't dilly-dally at all with the writing. We get straight to these weird things happening in Wonderland, but with the addition of Alice's internal monologues that were kind of weird. But this was a really good time and great perspective reading it as an adult too. Now for the books that I loved reading in February. The first one on this list is the one that I loved the least. It was my nonfiction read of the month. That was A Curious History of Sex by Kate Lister. Going into this one, I was a little bit nervous because I don't typically like a lot of history in my nonfiction. I tend to get really, really bored. And especially if it's like medical history. So with this topic, I didn't know if it would be like very clinical, but I ended up loving this. We covered so many different topics. Some of them are the history of the language that we use, none of which are words that I can say here on YouTube without getting dinged, but certain derogatory words towards women that we use, the history of that. Man, my ring light just does not want to participate. We're gonna go for the shadowed look now. The book also talked about the history of the beliefs of self-love, which was very fascinating and pretty wild what people used to believe. And then also talks about the history of the fetishization of Black men and women when it comes to this topic. Very sad about what some people experienced, and how the beliefs from those times have actually carried forward to modern day. So that was very, very interesting and insightful. The whole book was wildly thought-provoking, and the writing style was really witty and really funny. I enjoyed that. I especially enjoyed how the author threw in a lot of historical slang for things, like different terms and phrases, and then she would use the term or the phrase, and then she would say like which place and which year in which that term was used, and it was hilarious. Okay, I let the ring light cool off. Let's see how long we get light this time. Let's talk about the next book that I loved in February. Shark Heart, A Love Story, a literary fiction written by Emily Haybeck. This one was very, very weird. It is about a newlywed couple, and the husband finds out that he has this rare illness that is slowly going to turn him into a shark, like from human to shark. And it's not that strange. A lot of people get this disease. Some people turn into iguanas, some turn into hawks. It's something that just happens. There's like a whole medical system set up to deal with each phase of this transition. Strangely enough, the story isn't about that. It's really about the emotions of going through this. It is about grief, loss, moving on, hope. So I don't want to make it sound like it's about this whole shark disease, because that's not the situation. Now, I love this book. I rated it 5 stars. It was delightfully weird, and it just hit the spot. If I had been looking for something uplifting, I don't think I would have loved this. If I was looking for a plot-driven book, I wouldn't have liked this. It was so melancholy, and yet it was so beautiful. So beautifully written. It just really hit the spot for me this month. So I would definitely recommend this one, but only if you have the right expectations. I liked the descriptions of his transition, how he was kind of like losing control and turning into a shark, wanted to sleep in the bathtub. The wife built him a pool so he could be more comfortable, how his skin was transitioning, how he started to be able to breathe underwater, how he craved meat, and then they would go broke because she's just buying him all this fish. And that kind of stuff was still really creative and interesting. But again, not plot forward. This is really character driven, and the emotions that both those characters are going through, the people that come in and out of their lives. I love this book. Very fascinating. The next book that I loved in February has an amazing, stunning, exquisite dedicated reading vlog, if I do say so myself. And of course, I'm talking about The Way of Kings, book 1 in the Stormlight Archive, written by Brandon Sanderson. I had no doubt that I would love this book and this series because Brandon Sanderson is one of my favorite authors, but he really did not let me down. He is often described as a master of writing endings, and oh my gosh, when I got to the last section in this book, like the last quarter, last third, I read it in one sitting. I had goosebumps. I was choked up. It was so good. There were plot twists, there were cliffhangers, I was rooting on for these characters. I love the characters in this book. I am rooting for them so hard. I loved it. I was very, very confused about the world building and the magic system, but thanks to you guys in the comments on that dedicated reading vlog that I did, you guys explained to me that you're not supposed to understand everything. This is just an introduction to the world, and kind of the beauty of it is learning about the world and the magic throughout the reading journey. So I feel a lot better. I was feeling kind of dumb for a little bit there that I didn't understand everything. Like one of our characters has visions, and the comments, people in the comments were telling me, okay, you're not supposed to understand the visions yet. That is supposed to be an outstanding question. So I feel a lot better. But I really had a good time with this and getting the foundation. I loved it, although I did rate it 4 stars because of kind of that ambiguity that I was facing. I don't want to feel stupid when I'm reading, but I am super excited to continue with the series. The next book I loved in February is actually a complete series that I binge read this month. I'm talking about the Gold Rush Ranch contemporary romance series written by Elsie Silver. I am lumping all 4 books into one for this runner-up slot of my favorite read of the month. These are interconnected standalones, but they are so much better read together because you see cameos from some of your favorite characters. I love this because it actually put me in a reading slump. And that's because, I mean, the romance was cool, the chemistry was great, but what really gets me with this is I love the community, the found family that these main characters build. I love the banter between all of them. I just love their everyday lives. And I feel jealous. I feel jealous that I don't live on a horse farm in Canada with this beautiful setting, these rolling hills, these creeks, a lake, a beautiful custom ranch house, and like a barn for all the horses, and there's baby horses and fields, and there's the racetrack. I can't, okay? I just feel depressed that I don't live in this world. So I rated these 3, 3, 5, and 4. They weren't all perfect. The first one, I did not like how as soon as the male main character met the female love interest, like their first conversation and he is objectifying her, it felt very predatory and gross. Like he's describing her in all these different positions, like when he first meets her, and that was really nasty. But this one, Off to the Races, is book 1, and this is about one of the co-owners of a struggling racehorse farm, and he's hiring a new horse trainer. And so it's a female, and she's hot, and he likes her. So this is their story. And then the next one, A Photo Finish, is about his brother, who's the other co-owner, and the jockey that works on the farm. Then you have my favorite one, which was The Front Runner. This is their veterinarian, who she is amazing, love her, and her love story with their rival, the owner of a rival horse farm. So this is their story. And then A False Start is about the rival's best friend and the rival's sister. Scandalous, right? So that's how they are all interconnected, and why I say it's better to read them together, because you see the cameos and the relationships between everybody, and it just, all their struggles are so much more important to you when you have the backstory. But they are individual love stories. And this series made me feel much the same as her other one, the Bull Rider romance one that I am, Chestnut Springs. Chestnut Farms. Chestnut Springs. It gave me those same vibes with the found family and the chemistry and the banter and just this setting, this beautiful country setting, small town. Okay, I'm rambling, but I really loved it, and it did put me in a funk for a little bit. I didn't stop reading, but I was in this haze. I was in this haze after reading this because I want so badly to be part of their gang. It's unfortunate that my own boyfriend, while he's amazing, he's not a billionaire rancher or veterinarian or anything like. We gotta work on him, right? The best book that I read this month came as a little bit of a shock to me. Maybe you won't be surprised if you watched my vlog where I read this, because I was raving about it and how much I was surprised. But my favorite book that I read in February 2024 was The Book of Form and Emptiness, a literary fiction written by Ruth Ozeki. The vlog I did for this book was really interesting. I dive more into the details of this book and the things I enjoyed, so please check it out. I will link it down below for you. I say this came as a surprise to me because I don't really care to read about teenagers. I feel like they're always written like I know everything, and there's a lot of tension with the adults, and so sometimes it kind of bugs me. I think even parents of teenagers in real life can say that it's a frustrating world that they live in. So I don't know if you can blame me for that. This story is about a single mother raising a teenage son. So that kind of put me off a little bit, but I'm so glad I gave this a chance. This magical realism book was so creative, so interesting. It explores our relationship with things. We have Benny, the teenager, and he has this ability where he can hear things talk, or he can feel their emotions, and it is very overwhelming to him. And this presents a lot of unique situations in school. He gets bullied because kids just think he's weird, and he's just overwhelmed by all these voices, particularly since his mother starts hoarding. And so we have the relationship with things from both of their perspectives. And what was so interesting is we get both his perspective and his mother's perspective. And depending on which character we were with, I could totally sympathize with their situation as they're trying to understand each other, but really having a difficult time. Because not only does he have these abilities, but he's just a regular kid that wants his own independence. He wants friends. He wants to do his own thing. And on the other hand, his mother really wants to help him, but she doesn't understand this ability. She doesn't know about his mental state. She's trying to help him and do what's best for him. But she's worried. She's worried. And so I can understand like both of their sides of this. My favorite aspect of this book though is that we get another perspective. We get the perspective of a book. And this book actually narrates some chapters, narrates Benny's life from its perspective, and then has commentary on just the life of books and how the relationship of people with books. And that was probably my favorite element, but it wasn't an overwhelming amount because this story is really about these two characters, not the book. But it just added a little dash of that creativity. So that is why this book was my favorite of the month. The creativity, the writing style, the different themes that I wasn't used to, the exploration of relationship with things, really cool. Favorite read of the month. So there you have it. Those are the books that I read in the month of February, ranked from my least favorite to my most favorite. And even though February tried to throw some plot twists my way, it was a very successful reading month. Thank you so much for hanging out with me in this video, and until the next time, happy reading.